Welcome to the Evacuation Command and Control course. The objective of this training is to set forth the role, focus, and functions of incident management in the process of evacuation. The course begins by describing the relevant elements of incident command and the organization of the HICS element, the evacuation branch that manages the process. Training concludes with a discussion of the process for calling in additional staff, determining patient dispositions, and tracking patients to their destinations. One of the keystones to the hospital incident command system is its flexibility. There are various ways to organize the command component of an evacuation event while still complying with the fundamental components of HICS. In this course, we will discuss a few variables in the command structure, all with the same prime objectives: to adhere to the chain of command, ensure unity of command, use common position titles for organizational functions, and maintain a manageable span of control. For an evacuation to be accomplished in a safe and orderly manner, it must be managed and organized using a system that is familiar to all hospital staff. In order to achieve this objective, the evacuation process is incorporated into the hospital incident command system. This is done through the adaptation of the HICS Special Operations Branch. For the purposes of this process, the Special Operations Branch will be recognized as the Evacuation Branch and supervised by the Evacuation Branch Director, who reports to the Operations Section Chief. The mission of the Evacuation Branch is to direct, supervise, and control all resources and activities associated with evacuating the facility or the affected areas. While the other elements of the hospital incident management team provide support to the evacuation process and focus on dealing with the large set of problems that have led to the need for evacuation, the evacuation branch is actually carrying out the patient movement and tracking activities during the incident. Upon notification that an emergent evacuation is underway, or when planning the process for an urgent or planned evacuation, the Hospital Command Center will activate an evacuation branch within the operations section. The Evacuation Branch Director, who is typically a charge nurse from an unaffected area, is assigned responsibility for maintaining continuity of care and patient accountability for relocated or evacuated patients. That person is responsible for patients from their point of origin to their point of destination, if within the facility, or from the point of origin to the patient loading area, if patients will be leaving the facility. There are 5 distinct activities within the evacuation branch: horizontal movement, vertical movement, patient holding, patient loading, and tracking accountability. Each activity is accomplished through the assignment of a corresponding unit within the evacuation branch. For example, the horizontal movement unit and the vertical movement unit. Each unit established has a unit leader that reports directly to the evacuation branch director. These include the horizontal movement unit leader, vertical movement unit leader, patient holding unit leader, patient loading unit leader, and tracking and accountability unit leader. The horizontal movement unit leader is responsible for overseeing horizontal movement teams that directly move patients from their room or location to a pre-designated patient holding area on their particular floor. The horizontal movement team ensures continuity of care until the patient is turned over to the staff in the patient holding area. In a typical scenario, a movement team or teams may move several patients, one after the other, to the patient holding area. The order and sequencing of horizontal patient movement is based on proximity to the hazard, the patient's mobility and acuity level, and available resources. The horizontal unit leader would be instructed by the evacuation branch director concerning when a particular floor or unit is to be evacuated. The vertical movement unit leader is responsible for overseeing vertical movement teams that directly move patients from patient holding areas to a pre-designated loading area on the main floor. The vertical movement unit leader ensures continuity of care until the patient is turned over to a team leader in one of the 4 patient loading areas. Patients are typically moved one at a time, either down the elevator or via evacuation movement devices down an escalator or stairwell. When moving down a stairwell, vertical movement teams should be positioned at every 3 floors to reduce fatigue and the potential for injury of team members. The Evacuation Branch Director instructs the vertical movement unit leader when a particular patient holding area on a floor is to be evacuated. The patient holding unit leader is responsible for maintaining continuity of care for all patients in the holding area until they are handed off to a vertical movement team. The patient holding area is typically positioned in a safe location near the top of a transport shaft, such as a stairwell or elevator. While in the patient holding area, the patient holding unit leader is responsible for overseeing any necessary ongoing patient care, as well as coordinating with the Evacuation Branch Director as needed. The patient loading unit leader is responsible for maintaining continuity of care in each loading area and coordinating with the Evacuation Branch Director as needed until all patients have been transported and all evacuation equipment and medical care devices are redirected back into the hospital or sent to the receiving facility. For patients going by ambulance, the crew of the transporting vehicle moves patients out of the loading areas. Each loading area should be staffed to provide needed care and patient tracking coordination. The Tracking and Accountability Unit Leader is responsible for tracking patient destinations to ensure that each patient is transported to the appropriate facility or location. Patients will be assigned a destination in coordination with the Planning Section Patient Tracking Manager, which will be confirmed at the departure point. The ultimate destination for each patient and their time of departure are recorded on the HICS 255 Master Patient Evacuation Tracking Form. An Evacuation Operations Center, or EVOC, is established by the Evacuation Branch Director in a central, tactical location to coordinate activities, resources, and personnel required to accomplish the evacuation. The purpose of the EVOC is to provide a visible localized leadership and control point for a complex operation. It is not practical to perform the EVOC functions from the Hospital Command Center for at least 2 reasons. First, the Hospital Command Center is responsible for global strategic operations related to the incident itself, while the EVOC must accomplish directed tactical activities. Second, the Hospital Command Center is engaged in providing the necessary services and support so that the operations section can get the evacuation done, including tracking patients and acquiring resources. Physically separating the 2 sites helps streamline activities and provides better leadership of the evacuation functions. The EVOC is commonly set up at the nurses' station nearest to the impacted area. If more than one area is impacted, the most centrally located nurses' station is designated. If multiple floors are involved simultaneously, an evacuation group can be established on each floor, and the Evacuation Branch Director establishes the EVOC at a strategic location best suited to coordinate evacuation activities for that particular area. An evacuation group consists of all resources assembled to perform the evacuation function on a specific floor or area. For example, the 3rd floor evacuation group is established to perform the evacuation of the 3rd floor. An evacuation group consists of an evacuation group supervisor, horizontal movement teams, and any patient holding areas established for that floor. An evacuation group supervisor, who would report directly to the Evacuation Branch Director, leads the group. Through the EVOC, the evacuation group supervisor coordinates with the vertical movement teams to move patients from the holding area on their floor to loading areas on the main floor. Span of control is a key principle stating that the number of reporting elements that a manager can supervise is 5. By adding the position of evacuation group supervisor into the evacuation branch hierarchy, span of control is better maintained. Similarly, if a large number of elevators, stairways, and escalators are used concurrently with multiple vertical movement teams, a manageable span of control is maintained by assigning a group supervisor to the vertical movement function. If more vertical movement teams are needed, then one vertical movement group supervisor can oversee up to 5 vertical movement unit leaders assigned to organize teams and allocate resources. A dispatcher, called the Movement Control Officer, or MCO, is responsible for the coordination, dispatching, and movement of all patients down transportation shafts to the appropriate loading areas on the ground floor. This includes communicating with the elevator controllers in ground floor elevator lobbies of each elevator bank, and the elevator operators assigned to each elevator car, if elevators are in service. In this configuration, the Vertical Movement Group Supervisor continues to oversee the vertical evacuation of patients, mobilizes and demobilizes teams, replaces and assigns new team members, and assigns resources as needed. The EVOC should be staffed by the Evacuation Branch Director, the Transportation Unit Leader, a security staff member, and a minimum of 2 aides or recorders for support and documentation. In addition, a member of the Physician Assessment Strike Team is also stationed in the EVOC to help provide expedited clinical decision-making and decision support during the evacuation process, as well as make emergency clinical interventions as needed. The Transportation Unit Leader is from the Logistics Section and is responsible for providing additional support personnel and equipment to assist in movement of life support equipment and those patients needing extra help due to a critical condition. When fire department and/or EMS units arrive, an officer from each agency should be assigned to the EVOC as a liaison and communicator, and the EVOC should shift to a unified command mode for the affected area. It is important to remember that patients are moved based on their proximity to the threat, mobility classification, and their acuity level. They are not all moved simultaneously. Evacuation must be performed in a coordinated and efficient manner to prevent overwhelming any movement team, egress pathway, holding area, or staging location. Otherwise, bottlenecks will occur, demands will exceed incident leadership's span of control, and chaos will ensue. Even during an emergent evacuation, once patients are moved out of harm's way, the process of evacuation needs to shift from an emergent to an urgent mode if the operation is to be safe, effective, and efficient. Evacuation leadership should have quick access to floor plans and stacking diagrams of all the hospital floors, departments, and units to help them better visualize the various areas requiring evacuation. Computer-generated models may be used to map out and record evacuation patterns and priorities, the location of holding areas, and the positioning of vertical movement teams. Then, evacuated and secured areas can be marked on the diagram. Communication, both internal and external, becomes very complex during an evacuation. The hospital should plan for rapid deployment of supplemental communications equipment to support the evacuation process. Ideally, the evacuation branch would have at least 2 radio networks for their exclusive use, a command network and a tactical network. The EVOC monitors the command network and links the evacuation branch director with the various evacuation group supervisors and unit leaders. If telephones or other methods are unavailable, this link can also be used for patient tracking, for example, to report the status or movement of specific patients. Either the Movement Control Officer or an aide from the Evacuation Operations Center dispatches the tactical network. For example, if the 3 South patient holding area has patients ready for evacuation, the holding area unit leader contacts the Movement Control Officer, or MCO. The MCO, via the tactical network, dispatches Elevator Car 5 to the 3rd floor to pick up Vertical Team 1 and the patient and bring them down to the ground floor. If there are insufficient radios, the elevator controllers and elevator operators can communicate by in-car telephone, with the elevator controllers speaking by radio with the MCO. In summary, all coordination of actual patients and team movement takes place on the tactical network. Notifications and effective crisis communication from the hospital's public information and liaison officers play a major role in the success of an evacuation. Notification procedures, pre-scripted messages, and message tracking forms should be described in the hospital's Evacuation Support Annex. The communications unit leader from the logistics section should physically and technologically establish a notification center, with staff assigned as available to assist in the process and documentation. At a minimum, the hospital's public information officer should ensure timely and accurate notifications to State Department of Health, public safety agencies, local Office of Emergency Management, family, caregivers and responsible parties, private physicians, and the media. Governmental agency notification plans should specify the title of the person responsible for notification. They should include the protocol for notification of public safety for immediate response. Plans should also include a provision for keeping the information current. Family or responsible party notification is a key component of both patient tracking and effective communication. The hospital's plan should identify the process utilized to notify patient emergency contacts of an evacuation and of the patient's destination. The plan should also address the protocol to identify those patients who are unable to speak for themselves. Finally, the plan should identify processes for assignment of staff members to conduct and track family or responsible party notification. Most hospital planning anticipates that in any situation involving evacuation of a single facility, all patients will be transported to appropriate destinations in unaffected area facilities. Selection of specific alternate sites is performed as follows. The planning section activates a bed tracking manager who establishes contact with surrounding hospitals to determine bed availability in the region. The State Department of Health activates the Health Alert Network, or regional alternate, to assist in identifying bed and surge capacity in the region. When possible, this effort should be coordinated with the State Department of Health via the Health Alert Network, or regional alternate, to assist in identifying bed and surge capacity in the region. The Bed Tracking Manager, in conjunction with the Patient Tracking Manager within the planning section, designates and assigns beds and destinations to evacuating patients based on this information. They coordinate this information with the Tracking Accountability Unit Leader and all other facilities involved. Patients are generally assigned to beds in the following manner. Patients are sent to the closest, most appropriate bed where the level of care they require can be maintained. Patients with higher acuity are sent to closer facilities, thus reducing travel time and expediting turnaround of advanced life support ambulances. Patients with lower acuity, particularly walking and wheelchair mobility, are sent to more distant locations. Behavioral health and forensic patients are primarily sent to alternate hospitals with suitable secure facilities. Specialty care, like trauma, burn, oncology, pediatric, infant, and neonatal patients are primarily sent to similar facilities to continue their care regimen. Inside the facility, patients are tracked in the following manner. The wrist identification band is checked to verify initial identity. The evacuation go pouch with chart and patient information is physically affixed to the patient. As technology becomes available in the future, barcodes on evacuation pouches and equipment could be used to track patients and associated equipment throughout the facility and ultimately to their final destinations. HICS 255. Master Patient Evacuation Tracking Forms will be used in the patient loading areas to verify onward destinations and mode of transport. Remember that all of today's technological systems originated with paper systems, so any of them can readily fall back to paper-tracked systems if technology is not available. Most patients' personal property, other than prosthesis or assistive devices, will not be transported during a brief evacuation. It will be left behind, safeguarded by the hospital, and returned to the patient once the hospital is reopened. Hospital plans should specify the process to track the arrival of each patient at their predetermined ultimate destination. They should also specify the plan for patient repatriation to the original facility when the hospital returns to operational status. The tracking form used should contain key patient information, such as their medical record number or identifier, indication as to whether or not the original chart was sent with the patient, the time the patient left the facility, and the name of the transporting provider. In addition, the form should include a list of medications sent with the patient, whether or not the family has been notified of the transfer, and their contact information. As conditions evolve during an evacuation, give consideration to relocating several incident facilities. Establish an alternate hospital command center, as well as a public information area and labor pool area at the receiving facility that is closest to the transferring hospital. This will expedite the evacuation, recovery, and repatriation processes by enabling the command and control element to remain operational without interruption. In this course, we have presented the role, focus, and functions of incident management in the process of hospital evacuation, and continued with the functions of incident communications, staff mobilization, and patient tracking. In the final training course, logistical considerations specific to hospital evacuation will be presented.